China is now India's biggest trading partner. Confusing as it may sound, China overtook the US in fiscal year 2024 to become India's biggest trading partner, with total trade between the two countries jumping to $118.4 billion. This underscores that India has been utterly unsuccessful in decoupling from its not at all friendly neighbour to the east. Now, as you might know, India's trade with China is largely one-sided, which is to say, India imports a whole lot more from China than it exports. But how did this happen? Why did India fail to bridge the trade imbalance? What were the policy failures responsible for this? And what can be the possible repercussions of this? I'm Abhishek Singh and you're watching The Mint. In this video, I will help you find answers to all those questions. So keep watching. 9 years ago, China wasn't a foe. Nine years ago, Modi government wanted to encourage trade between two Asian giants.
And there's a lot of political will now to take India-China economic relationship to another level and another height, and to impart a lot of dynamism, a lot of momentum to this economic relationship. India's exports to China are about $14.8 billion, whereas imports from China are about 51 billion. 51 billion imports, 14.8 billion exports.
Even the Chinese acknowledged India's efforts to promote trade between the two countries.
The Modi's government has taken effective measures to enhance government efficiency, improve market environment, and make it easier and friendlier for Chinese business to invest in India, including granting e-visa to Chinese nationals, appointing a joint secretary in the Prime Minister's office to overlook Chinese investment, and relaxing restrictions and security checks for Chinese companies.
But then, China decided to cross a line, the most important one, the McMahon line, despite existing agreements. Not that the ties between the two countries were great before China's belligerent move in the Himalayas, but at least the battle swords and knives were sheathed. Improvised tridents, batons, maces had still not been used on a modern battlefield. The clash left 40 Indian soldiers dead. Trust between two countries was broken, and its first victim was going to be trade. For the first time, China's unfair trade practices became an eyesore for the Modi government. Indians were appealed to bring down imports from China. India even decided to not join RCEP, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is a free trade agreement among the Asia-Pacific countries.
But we also had China in that room, with whom we have very serious concerns about the way they are carrying out their trade, about the way Chinese ecosystem is locked down for fair trade practices with other countries.
Seeing India stand hardened, China had to acknowledge that trade imbalance is indeed a problem.
The imbalance of trade in goods between China and India has been one of the factors troubling the economic and trade cooperation between the two countries. To make it clear, China has never deliberately pursued trade surplus. China is fully aware that balanced trade is sustainable and beneficial to both sides.
It started telling stories of how China is accelerating registration and approval of Indian products.
Over a long period of time, China has taken serious measures to reduce the trade imbalance in goods and made positive progress in promoting the import of agriculture products from India to China and accelerating the registration and approval of Indian pharmaceuticals.
But when has China ever said and done the same thing? There was failure at our end too. Despite Indian government's rhetoric and efforts to curb Chinese imports, the rather one-sided trade continued. And the government, which failed to bridge the gap, or for that matter, even bring down Chinese imports, resorted to explanations.
After 2004, almost an outreach was done to engage more with China, to attract Chinese goods into the country in a big way. But between 2004 and 14, we saw trade grow very, very rapidly, and the trade deficit went up by over 30 times, nearly 35 times. Now, it's something for the powers that be at that time to really be held accountable for.
Although the minister is correct as far as the trade facts are concerned, indulging in whataboutery, citing the growth between 2004 and 2014, won't help India's cause. And now we are where we are, at a crossroads of sorts. On one hand, we have a border problem to solve, and on the other hand, India is increasingly dependent on China. Not just dependent, but even strengthening the enemy with our own precious foreign reserves. India's main imports from China, machines and electric appliances, made up over half of all Chinese imports in fiscal year 2024. China sold machinery worth nearly $54 billion and over 10% growth year on year. India also imported chemicals worth $11.5 billion, plastic goods worth $5.7 billion, iron and steel products worth $4.7 billion, and fertilizers worth $2.2 billion from China. This brings us to the next set of questions. Why did government's efforts to check Chinese flooding the Indian market with cheap goods fail? But before that, let's briefly discuss the steps taken by the government. India took multiple steps, like increasing import duties. In 2019, duties were raised on air conditioners, CDs, DVDs, CRT monitors, and TV display panels. The list was expanded to include fans, water heaters, ovens, electric vehicles, and compressors for refrigerators, adding several other Chinese items to the list. Hundreds of Chinese apps were banned. FDI rules were amended to curb Chinese investments. Chinese companies operating in India came under greater scrutiny. Several PLI schemes were launched to boost local production of goods. Yet, the trade between the two countries jumped by 4% to $118.4 billion from $113.8 billion in fiscal year 2023. But the facts I just mentioned raise more questions than answers. First and foremost, why did these efforts fail? Why did India fail in decoupling? In a connected world, which has been dependent on China for the small and even the latest in tech for more than a decade, decoupling is easier said than done. Finding an easy fix is more difficult than finding a unicorn. And that's because no other country makes everything. Even if a country positions itself to compete with China in some category, China crushes it with price cuts. And a growing economy like India needs to strike a balance. In several sectors, like renewable energy, electronics, and EVs, the Indian industry lacks the technology and scale to compete with China. Curbing imports in such cases would mean burdening the consumer with high-priced, globally uncompetitive products. PLI schemes are expected to show results. But even in the best-case scenario, it will only happen in the medium term. China now accounts for 10.6% of India's global trade and 15% of its import bill. The deficit is wider than ever. But a short-term solution to this problem does not exist. Which means the success of India's decoupling efforts is dependent on how successfully it executes the plans to make in India and slowly wean off from cheap Chinese goods without hurting Indian businesses and households. In other words, even in the best-case scenario, China is likely to continue to be an enemy who is also India's biggest trading partner. What do you think about China replacing US as India's biggest trading partner? Don't forget to share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Please like and share this video and subscribe to The Mint.